Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 122nd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to discuss a concept which I called information translation. It's kind of a weird title, but you'll see as the video progresses, you'll understand basically what it means. So let's get into the meat of the topic. So, as I've discussed many times, ultimately, our reality is just an exchange of information that takes the form of vibrations that interact with each other, and that information has to be translated or interpreted or given a form to. So just like computers give a form to binary language, like zeros and ones, and that they give it a form which is an interface, which is your operating system's interface, for instance. So too, every conscious element in the universe, or any element for that matter in the universe, has to give a form to that exchange of information and has to create an interface. So let me give you a very easy example. When, for instance, from the human perspective, you see a danger, like a lion that's racing towards you. You perceive the lion, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in your brain, lots of decisions are being made and stuff, and all of that information that you're perceiving is translated into chemical language. That is, there are all kinds of hormones which are produced. There are all kinds of electric signals that course through your body into your muscles, through the nervous system. But those chemical reactions and those hormones, they do not translate what is really happening. That is, your cells do not receive information as there is a lion that is going to eat us, and we have to really start working really hard and moving the body in this direction. That information is lost to them. So it's as if you had a high density information here that is accessible to the human. That is, there's a lion, he's at 100 meters, he's running at this speed. If I run at X speed, I'll be able to reach a tree. I need to do this, that, all the movements that you need to do, all of the projections, what it means, you're afraid of dying. All of that information is then converted into just very simple information, chemical information. And it's impossible to reverse engineer and go back to the original information once it is translated. That is, if you just observed the chemical reactions and the hormones and the signals sent to your muscles, you would never be able to recover the much more complex information that you as a human had access to and was responsible for producing those chemical reactions. Ultimately, you could also have like a car racing towards you and about to hit you, and you needed to jump on the sidewalk to avoid it, and ultimately the chemical reactions and the nervous the input or the information that is courses through your nervous system would be virtually the same. And so this is what happens when you go from one sort of layer of the universe to the other, is when you go downwards, information gets lost. Information also gets distorted. And so it's really hard to actually understand the full complexity of the initial information. And that's how you get books like the Bible or sacred books or even channeling, which is a way to translate higher dimensional kind of information into human language and words. And when you're doing that, you're doing the exact same process as when your body translates a higher density information into chemicals. And you can see, even at the human level, how this can sort of go wrong. For instance, if you're agoraphobic, or you're afraid of spiders, for instance, arachnophobia. If you see a tiny little spider which does not represent any real danger biologically for your body, for your body's integrity, you're going to, your conscious you, basically, that has all these problems and phobias and traumas, is going to initiate a chemical storm inside your body for no obvious reason, for no logical or biological reason. And that is just one sort of metaphor to how these messages, or these when the messages are translated from one level to the other of the universe, things can go wrong. But there are many other examples, of course. I mean, in the Bible, for instance, there's the whole idea that the man should not have listened to the woman, and Adam and Eve, and original sin, and all kinds of other things. And all of those things are highly distorted information due to the problems of the receiver, the distortions that the people that were receiving the information applied to the original message. Just like in this case, like this arachnophobic person is going to translate information from the outside, that is, I see a spider, that is information that you see and that you're supposed to convert into chemical information for your body in a accurate and suitable sense. And because of this filter, you're doing it improperly. Now, what am I trying to get to here? And this is really important. When you look at events like the coronavirus or the war between Russia and Ukraine, so maybe they have a much deeper meaning, and we just choose to experience that meaning via a form which is the result of our beliefs and our belief systems. So let me give you an example. Imagine, so there's a woman, she's at 9 months pregnancy, and it's there's some health complications. So there's the baby in the womb, and the baby, for instance, has the umbilical cord tied around the neck. And so what happens? There is, from the perspective of a human being looking at this with with the modern instruments, medical instruments, it takes a certain form. That is, we humans can conjure up all kinds of information about what's going on. That is, for instance, we have the concept, we have developed words and concepts and things like, the umbilical cord, oxygen, energy, life and death. And so we can use that then and see something like this and say, okay, there's a danger to the life of the baby, we have to untie the umbilical cord. But now let's go down to the level of the individual cells of the baby. They experience the fact that the baby is suffocating via a chemical interface. That is the consequence of something that they don't understand, which is the umbilical cord is tied around the baby's neck, is translated into chemical consequences, which they experience as lack of resources, like for instance, not enough oxygen, and death for many of those cells, premature death. But there is absolutely no way that you can recover the original meaning of what's actually happening. There can be an infinite number of causes for these things to happen. This chemical what's happening at the chemical level. And so now just extrapolate this principle to the events that are unfolding. The coronavirus. So as I'm saying, I have this way of saying that what's inside and outside is very much related. And that just like the cell from the inside is contains DNA, which then determines what is going to manifest on the outside, which manifests as the baby. And the cell is not necessarily aware of that process. It is something that is quote unquote unconscious, like DNA is just like a sort of a template that the cell follows, and it has no idea that by following that template, it will manifest the baby as a form. It can never figure that out. And for humans, the same applies. That is, our bodies are the template, or a kind of DNA at our level for what we're going to manifest on the outside, but it's also the experience in the womb is also part of that programming. This is like a program, because ultimately we've all experienced pretty much the same thing inside the womb, but then our experiences once outside of the womb are infinitely diverse. When in the womb, we pretty much experience the same things as humans. So our own bodies, the way they function, plus our experience within the womb, are the inside codes for what we're going to manifest on the outside. Now, this example of the baby lacking resources, lacking oxygen, and the individual cells suffocating is one particular thing that can happen, one particular complication that can happen towards the end of pregnancy. And if you look closely, the coronavirus, the symptoms of the coronavirus are just that. That is, individual humans are at the risk of dying of suffocation for lack of oxygen, not being able to breathe. So, but it's just that this is at a higher level of complexity, and we choose to experience that something that's happening that is beyond our understanding via a set of beliefs, which is, for instance, science and cause and effect. And so the coronavirus is just a form which we give to an event, which is just a sort of an informational interaction between something on the outside that affects the whole planet and the whole of humanity, and humanity. So let's just say that planet Earth and humanity here is just a big bundle of information. And then there's always information coming out from the outside. Just like there's information on what the baby is supposed to do, going from the mother towards the baby while it's in the womb. I mean, we're just bathing in an ocean of information. And one information, potential information, for instance, that the baby can receive towards the end of pregnancy is time to be born. Because otherwise the mother is going to suffer and die because there's some complications, health complications and stuff. Sometimes like certain births are provoked actually. But how does that message, time to be born, get translated at the level of chemistry? Like the chemical reactions that happen in the body that sort of provide the hint to the baby and incentivize the baby to say, okay, now move towards the exit. Well, again, that message is completely lost in translation. Of course, it does manifest as chemistry and stuff, but you would never be able to recover the original message. And to me, what's happening with the coronavirus, for instance, is that same kind of thing, is that it's one form or one event that just means time to be born for humanity. And one way of incentivizing a baby, for instance, to go to get out of the womb is to put it, if it's too comfortable in the womb, for instance, and doesn't want to be born, then actually making it suffocate or making it making the baby feel like it's trapped and there's not enough space in the womb. All of these things are ways to sort of signal towards the exit in one way or another. And that it may be available to the baby's consciousness that is forming at that time, but certainly not to the individual cells, which only get the sort of chemical equivalent or conclusions of the decision that the developing consciousness of the baby has reached. And so the same is happening to humanity, basically. Coronavirus, same symptoms as this process, which again, I believe that since we're always, there's an inside-outside relationship, we are taking inspiration from things that we've already been through as humanity inside the womb, and then just transposing them outside, because it's something that since we've experienced it, we're kind of familiar with it, and so we kind of know how to react to it. Let's put it that way. And then the form is really interesting because the form at our level adds utility, sort of a usefulness for picking a form over another. So you see, how should I put this? We need to be born as a global collective organism, and on top of the information of or the experience of feeling like we need to move on or change or whatever, the form allows you to revisit certain belief systems and evolve in those beliefs. So for instance, if science and cause and effect are outdated or too limited belief systems and need to go, otherwise we cannot evolve as humans, then the coronavirus takes the form of the symptoms of suffocation, for instance, death and all that stuff, take the form of a virus specifically to teach humanity a lesson. A bit like the Black Plague in the Middle Ages was the reverse. It was rather teaching humans to move away from religion and into science, because regardless of how many times you prayed, it didn't really make a difference. And today it's... Sorry, I'm really tired. Today it's just... it has a new kind of utility, which is the same purpose, basically. It's just to move on from science to something else, like spirituality or some other beliefs that are less limited and restricted than materialist science and traditional medicine and vaccines and all those stuff. And now the war between Russia and Ukraine. Again, towards the end of pregnancy, you have the placenta, and the placenta towards the end of pregnancy can calcify, and there's less and less resources of the mother flowing to the baby. And so the baby again experiences this as not just a lack of oxygen because he's suffocating, because he has the umbilical cord tied around the neck, but also a lack of other resources, that is like the bloodstream of the mother and various proteins, minerals, all kinds of things that you find in the bloodstream besides oxygen. And so one of the consequences of this war is shortages in energy, like gas and oil, food maybe, Again, the symptoms are the same, but the form is a war, a conflict. But you understand that the war is definitely not really a belief, but let's just say it's something, a behavior that humanity must get rid of if we are to be born as a collective global organism, because this is essentially an autoimmune disease. Kind of behavior. Like if parts of your body are attacking other parts of your body, I mean, you wouldn't stay alive for very long. And so, again, it manifests as a war because it has this added benefit of teaching humanity a lesson on top of manifesting an experience which is just meant to accelerate our the pressure on us as humanity to get ready for our own quote-unquote birth. And so that's why it's really important, and this is really, really important, to disconnect the context or the form from what you should be doing in reaction to the form. The form is there to teach certain things to certain people that still need to advance in their consciousness, their understanding of reality and all these things. But if you get caught up in trying to figuring out who's the victim, who's the perpetrator, who's good and evil, and all of those things, you're not really doing a service to what we're supposed to be doing. Because it's as if the cells within the baby were trying to find out who's responsible for this terrible chemical environment where there is less oxygen. And that's besides the point. It's not about blaming others. It's not about finding, who's at fault or whatever. It's really to read the subtext and the underlying message, because that's what's really important. And so in the previous video, I was talking about a non-dual sort of interpretation of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that is, I believe, a correct one, because it addresses this issue of moving past certain limiting things, limiting beliefs like war, and acting like an autoimmune disease, and getting rid of that kind of behavior without getting sucked into blaming and pointing fingers and judging, but just simply a way out. It's as if the baby's stomach was still fighting with the intestines and was trying to digest the intestines, and certain cells just sort of got it. It sort of clicked, and all the organs took their rightful place and started to work together in a coordinated and harmonious way. And that sort of unlocked the possibility for being born as a lively baby as opposed to a stillbirth dead baby. So I hope this was kind of clear. I think it's really hard sometimes to integrate this information, because it kind of means that Putin, Russia, Ukraine, the president of Ukraine, the people, all of what is happening is it's almost as if at some level they chose to play those roles on purpose, just like two actors that do an improv on stage in front of spectators or the public, and via their interaction they're teaching something to the public, to the people watching. So if you have, for instance, a scene, a theatrical scene where you have a murderer and a victim on stage, and they're playing it, and they're playing it very, very convincingly, it is not the public's role to sort of come in on stage and start pummeling the perpetrator and saving the victim. It's really about just seeing how you can evolve as a human being in your consciousness by being exposed to that kind of theatrical scene. And the best way to stop it from happening is to remove the need for the public to see that scene. That is, if you have, for instance, say you have like a scene here with 100 humans that represent cells in the global collective organism, and their level of consciousness is like here, 5/20, let's say. And that represents basically the harmony at which they operate as a collective global organism. Now, how do you raise their consciousness? Either you can try to make all of them interact with each other as mirrors, and that's what we do basically, but sometimes it's not strong enough. Or you can have them watch and contemplate a scene where there's only two humans that are mimicking very, very painful and terrible and caricatural and extreme experiences, such as murder, rape, or God knows what. And that sort of shocks all of these people into a willingness to change and shift their consciousness upwards and saying, no more of this. And that was basically what World War II did to humanity, with the concentration camps and the terrible things that happened there, genocides, mass genocides. Well, I'm gonna go to bed soon. God. um, that World War II served that purpose. And it appears that we need to experience these things once more, again, because we haven't learned the lesson fully. That is, the lesson that we learned from World War II is, of course, we want peace, but peace to be gained by and secured by nation states and strong, democratic nation states. And that logic is failing us now. And if you want to know more, just watch my previous video on the Russia-Ukraine war. And it's also, and so it's really hard when you see all of this, not to be tempted to go actually on stage and help these people, because at a certain level they've sort of volunteered to play that, to do that, in order to raise the consciousness of all of us. And it could have been any other person, any other human being. What's certain in my mind is that we're not helping anyone if we don't raise our consciousness and we just stick to our current beliefs and current ways of thinking, and believe in nation states as our savior, and that salvation is going to come through representative democracy. It's just like the Black Plague. You weren't helping anyone if you were praying 20 or 30 or 50 times a day. At that time, it was better to start developing better measures of hygiene and listening to the first sort of doctors and medical people that were experimenting with various herbal medicines. And so, yeah, I think if you raise your consciousness enough, then you remove the need for those actors to sort of self-sacrifice and play those kind of games there. And it doesn't mean we should do nothing. It just means that you can't help someone against their own will and what they've chosen to experience. You can alleviate a little bit of their suffering, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I think that's great, actually, to this kind of solidarity where you fund charities that tend to the wounds of the wounded. That's absolutely great. It's like, how should I say? It's like throwing a bottle of water to the people on stage. They're playing these roles, so because maybe they're kind of tired of playing and supporting them. But if you want them to stop their act, what they're actually doing, then you have to raise your consciousness as the public. And that's what we have to do at this level is. And the coronavirus, also the form of the coronavirus and the way that the nation states have reacted, you can see that the signal and the message is exactly the same. That is, nation states are the ones that are creating wars ultimately. It's not Russian people that spontaneously took up arms and went to shoot at Ukrainians. It's a head of state that just arbitrarily decided to invade another country. And nation states are also the ones that are imposing all of these crazy measures and mandatory vaccinations and all that stuff following the coronavirus crises, treating humans like robots. And I've done a video also on the deeper meaning behind the coronavirus. And so those two experiences, again, go in exactly the same direction. It's time to move past the model of nation states, because they're the ones that are kind of preventing us from moving forward as a collective, as humanity, in our evolution, in reaching a point where we can function like one global collective organism. And so, yeah, I realize that all of this is very controversial and difficult to accept. And even for me, it's also, of course, It's not easy, and I'm not saying that I'm still like kind of on the fence between just raising my consciousness and actually somehow helping, like even like taking in refugees or funding, you know, people that do take refugees or whatever. And I think we need to do both, of course, because we are not yet evolved enough to be able to affect something just by changing our inside, and then that reflects on the outside. We have to act on both fronts simultaneously, because we're just not at that level where you just can shift your belief and then suddenly the world transforms around you. We will reach that level at a certain point in our evolution, but right now we need to, I think it's not that kind of, we haven't reached that level yet. So sorry about I'm having a little bit of trouble with this video because I'm just so tired. I hope you found it interesting nonetheless and were able to get some interesting insight out of it. Feel free to leave a comment, and talk to you in the next video.